Thank you. Ah,
Beatrice, do you do Thanksgiving?
Sure.
Okay.
The first year that I was in America, I tried to go to the 24-hour reading room at Columbia University, and it was closed. So after that, I realized I needed to make plans on Thanksgiving.
Okay.
By default, today, not 365 days a year. Yeah. That's funny.
All right. Oh, why did I do that? I hit the wrong button, sorry. Let's share the screen. All right, so we're in Parshat Vayeshev. And with it, we really begin for the rest of Sefer Bereshit, the story of Yosef and the drama with him and his brothers. And I wanted tonight to focus on an idea that kind of pops up in a few different places in the context of this parsha. We'll at the end, we'll talk about whether it's, how intrinsic this is to our understanding and analysis of the unfolding of the narrative, but it certainly is an important methodological idea in any study of Chumash. So I hope it'll be, you'll find it as interesting as I did. And the hero for tonight will, I think, be the Rashbam, but you'll also tell me at the end if you agree with that assessment of things. So,
Yummy.
so the parsha begins, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migrei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Ela toldot Yaakov, Yosef ben 17 shana haya ro'et echav batzon. Who na'ar et b'nei Bilha b'nei Zilpa neshei aviv vayavei Yosef et dibatam ra'a el avihem. These are the Yaakov settles in the land of Canaan, in the land of his ancestors. This is the generations or the history or the story of Yaakov. Yosef is 17 years old, was the shepherd with his brothers, and he was the youngest with the sons of Bilha and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Yosef brought their bad reports to their father. It's a weird way of starting, but then we go into hearing about the jealousy that arises between Joseph and his brothers, and the centrality of his dreams and all of that. It's if you look at the Hebrew, it's a very awkward couple of verses to translate. So I didn't stick with the English in my trying to translate it. It's some of the phrases are quite awkward. But here, let's look at what the Rashbam has to say. And this is not a comment on the psukim we just read. This is a general introduction. The Rashbam is a fascinating figure. What do we know about his biography before we get into what he wrote? Shmuel ben Meir. You have his dates on the screen. 1085 to 1158 in France. The Rashbam was the grandson of Rashi.
Rashi, right.
Right.
His mother was Rashi's daughter, and him and his three brothers are among the greatest of the Tosafists that we have. Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Yaakov Tam was his brother, Rabbi Yitzchak, and the Rashbam. He's quite a significant figure in the history of the Masorah. So he begins the parsha, and it's interesting also why this comment appears here. There are those who, many versions of the Mikraot Gedolot, of the standard Chumash with the various traditional commentaries that usually accompany it. The Rashbam only begins to appear as one of the commentaries at the bottom of the page with Parshat Vayeshev.
Oh.
first there were theories that maybe the beginning of his commentary was lost to us. It seems it was more of a censorship issue. The Rashbam was someone who devoted himself to the Pshat, the simple, plain meaning of the text, and as a result would say things that were quite controversial. So among the controversial things that he said is Vahi Erev, Vahi Voker, Yom Rishon, right? So we know that in Judaism, we always say that the day starts at the nighttime. The Rashbam disagrees with this. The Rashbam says that's not the Pshat, right? Meaning maybe that's what halacha says, and from a halachic perspective, that's true, but that's not the Pshat, that's not how life is. The reality is a day starts with the sunrise. And so that's one example of the controversial statements that he made that some felt were cause for his beginning commentary to be excluded from traditional Mikrot Gedolot. So it's unclear if he wrote what we're about to read in the context of Parshat Vayeshev and where it is, or if this was kind of his general introduction, and since they only began printing what he wrote with Parshat Vayeshev, they took his introduction and plopped it in here. Okay?
Wow. Okay.
So that in itself, I think, is fascinating.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's see what he has to say. Yes, kilu v'avinu avei sechel shekol mashalim dunu rabotenu ki ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. This is his driving principle and theory. All those, this is not a great translation. This was what the Sefaria had up as the translation. So all those who love the pursuit of intellect will understand. And among all that our rabbis teach us, ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. The mikra, the Torah, never departs from pshat, from its simple meaning. Okay, so I'm translating pshat as simple meaning. I was originally taught that pshat means the literal meaning. And anyone who's ever tried to translate anything will know, like Beatrice, you could probably talk about this better than anyone else on this call, that when you're translating, it's very, if you go for a literal translation, it's usually not a very good translation. You're going to miss most of what's trying to be conveyed. So I've evolved to translate pshat as the simple reading, but some do still translate it as the literal meaning. So the Torah never departs from its pshat, from its simple or literal meaning. Af ki ikara shel Torah ba'al lamdenu ladeinu remizat pshat v'agadot v'halachot v'adinin ayidei arichot halashon ayidei 32 midot shel Rabbi Elazar beno shel Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'ayidei 13 midot shel Rabbi Yishmael v'arishonim mitoch chasidotam itasku mintot acharei hadrashot shehin ikar. Even though the essence of Torah is really to teach us halacha and agada and the laws that we have to follow, and this is taught through allusions in the pshat, through hints in the simple meaning of the text, and through the various exegetical principles that we have, whether it's the 32 exegetical principles of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, or the 13 of Rabbi Yishmael, that we say those at the beginning of davening every morning. And the Rishonim would spend the bulk of their time and their efforts and energy on the drashot, understanding the exegetical means by which halachot are extrapolated from the Torah text, shehein ikar, because that really is the most important. Because they were so focused on halacha and on the agada, they did not delve into the depth of the pshat of the Torah. Okay, so it's right, even that phrase, omek pshuto shel mikra, the depth of the simplest meaning. It seems to be somewhat of a contradiction in term. It's the simplest meaning, you shouldn't have to delve so deeply into it. It should be simple, it should be easy. But no, he says that there is the omek pshuto shel mikra, And he's saying, right, up until this point, almost everyone who's focused on Torah study has not been focused on delving into the Pshat. They've been focused more on halachic extrapolations and applying and understanding what the how the Torah connects to the halachot that we practice. Everyone good up until now?
Yep.
Ulefi she'amru chachamim al tarbu b'neichem b'hegyon. Now we quote an interesting quote from the Gemara. It says, "Do not spend a lot of time teaching your children hegyon, logic. V'gam omrim ha'osek b'mikra midah ve'eno midah. Ha'osek b'talmud ein lecha midah gdola mizo." If you focus your learning efforts and energy on the Torah text, so that's a midah ve'ena midah. There's value, but there's also not value. It's not the best way of spending your time and energy. But if you focus your energy and your time and your efforts on Talmud, ein lecha midah gdola mizo. There's nothing greater than focusing your energy on Talmud. Mitoch kach lo hurgalu kol kach bipshutan shel mikraot. And because of that, they did not spend a lot of time developing or understanding or trying to figure out the Pshat. Again, we're going to translate that as the simple reading, the simple meaning of the biblical texts. Uchtamrinan b'masechet Shabbos, as it says in Tractate Shabbos. We'll come back to this Gemara in a little bit. I was quoting one rabbi, Havinan bar Tzmeina Sari Shanim, the Garcinan Kula Talmuda Vloha Vayadana, the Emi Krayotzemi De Pshuto. So there's this rabbi who says, I'm 18 years old, I spent my whole life learning, and the entire Talmud, and I never knew this idea that Emi Krayotzemi De Pshuto, that the Torah text cannot depart from its Pshat meaning. The Gam Rabbeinu Shlomo, Avi Ami, Avi Imi Meir Ene Gola. So now he quotes his grandfather Rashi, my mother's father, who is Meir Ene HaGola, who brings light to all those in the diaspora. Shapirish Torah Nevi'im Uketuvim. We know he gave a commentary on all of Tanakh. Natan Lev Lefaresh Pshuto Shel Mikra. Rashi tells us many times that his mission, his goal in his commentary is to explain the Pshat, the simple meaning of the Torah. Afani Shmuel bar Rabbi Meir Chatno Zatzal Nitvakachti Imo Ulifanav. I, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Meir, Rashbam, argued many times with my grandfather, the Hodali, She'ilu Hayalo Pnai, Hayat Sarich Lasot Perushim Achirim Lefi HaPshatot HaMitchadshim B'chol Yom. And he says that my grandfather Rashi admitted to me, after I would poke holes or critique many of his commentaries, that if he had time, he would have to rewrite or write another commentary on the Torah according to all the interpretations based on, I love this phrase, Pshatot HaMitchadshim B'chol Yom. Pshat interpretations, simple meanings of the text, HaMitchadshim, that are renewed or that are found anew every day. Okay, so he says that right up until this point in history, the focus of Torah study has really been more on halachic exegesis, and Torah, the Torah as a book, Tanakh, was only really there in order to help connect the halachic interpretations to have basis in the Torah text. But that, he says clearly, is not the Pshat. The drashot that we find throughout the Gemara are not Pshat. Because the primary focus and energy of Torah and study has been on halachic interpretation, the great giants of yesteryear did not endeavor to find the Pshat of the Torah. And even Rashi, right, even commentators such as Rashi, who do say that they endeavor to study the Pshat, to uncover the simple, plain meaning of the text, there's many holes in their commentaries and what they say. And Rashi, he says, so much so agrees and was admitted that he really should rewrite much or revisit much of what he says, because there is new interpretations, new pshat that emerges every day. Okay, so I want to spend tonight focusing on what exactly is meant by pshat. What do we mean when we say what's the pshat? What's the pshat of the Torah? Pshuto shel mikra, the simple reading of the text. If it's so simple, how could it be that there's new simple understandings that are being discovered every day? Any questions or thoughts on this very provocative Rashbam? Beatrice, yeah.
I thought it just so happens that I've been listening to some of Rabbi Silber's drashot about Vayeshev, and what you just read made me think of the way he expounds on Torah, because he very much sticks to the text. It's like he's doing a close reading.
Yeah.
He compares the one part of the text with another. He thinks about the text without bringing midrashim or other outside sources to explain it. He thinks in a very detailed way about what the exact language of the text means.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to him speak and respond to questions that it was a recording of a class and respond to questions, it was clear that however many times he learns a text, he always finds something new when he goes back and learns it again.
Yeah.
And it was, and his method of reading is I would call it close reading from a literary point of view.
Yeah. I'll add now, and I'm not sure if this is one of the interesting developments, right? The Rashbam is bemoaning the fact that in his day and age there hasn't been proper analysis and study of the text of the Torah text as Torah, right, as a text in itself. One of the interesting contemporary developments, and this fits in with Zionism, with the development of the state of Israel, is that in the previous generation, I guess we could say now, was a reintroduction of Torah study as separate from Parshanut and as separate from the Gemara. And so we have all sorts of interesting developments that have come, right? Part of this is the Zionist movement's desire to return to, quote, authentic Judaism and to separate itself from the image of the yeshiva as, hunched over Gemara, right? That there's some vitality, there's some more authenticity, better models perhaps for what the Zionists were trying to achieve in settling the land and establish an army and all that in Tanakh as opposed to Talmud. And so part of that is a secular religious divide. But within the yeshiva world of the yeshivot Hester, there's been a real revolution in terms of how to study Torah, as Beatrice was describing, really confined within the Torah itself, and not reliant on rabbinic interpretations or other sources, which has been quite interesting. I see two hands. Anne.
Oh, thank you.
I see your hand and not your face, but yes.
Good. Thank you. I can surely say two things about this. One is that our dear Rabbi Shafran was often concerned, even though his one of his sons was a high school principal up in Ner Israel, or teacher at least, and maybe I thought principal also at one point. And of course, Rabbi Avi writing for Aguda, but he was very concerned that there was not enough study and understanding at all of the whole Tanakh. That is, he certainly was a religious Zionist. There was no question about that in Rabbi Shafran's mind. So he really appreciated the fact that suddenly the prophets were speaking to people and they were taking their words and paying attention to them and so on. I mean, there's a, but you're speaking of Torah study, it's meaning Chumash also in that regard, I think perhaps. I mean, after all, the promise of the land, the gift of the land, it's so strong. I mean, it's right there. But he was really concerned about that they weren't learning enough of the Tanakh. They just
Right.
really weren't.
Right.
And it came through in many different ways. I mean, he strove, he learned every week with someone up at Ner Israel himself, but it isn't as if he was trying to make a big revolution in the curriculum, but it really bothered him. The other thing is that you may find it strange to realize this, but of course, I mentioned it before, the Rebbe always pays attention to the Rashi, and he also always says that one should never violate the Pshat.
Right.
So, he perhaps, I mean, the debates between Rashi and the Ramban are fascinating because the Ramban, in effect, is saying, no, that's not what the part, the simple meaning is. So, I mean, this is a fascinating subject. I think really.
Yeah.
One day I told Rabbi Shafran, I said, Rabbi, I think you know Chumash better than the rabbis in there. And he didn't say no. He accepted my statements.
You said in Tanakh better.
Did I say Tanakh?
No, you said Chumash, I think. Or I think you said Tanakh to him.
Oh, okay. So that's what I mean. Yeah.
As I remember it. Yeah.
All right. So we'll keep this in mind, and let's see one interesting example from the parsha. So we're down in source number 4 now. Vayomer lo. So this is Yaakov now speaking to Yosef. Vayomer lo lech na re'ei et shlom achecha ve'et shlom hatzon v'ashiveni davar. So Yaakov says to Yosef, go see how your brothers are doing and how the sheep are doing, and come and report back to me. And he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And as Yosef is going to find his brothers, he encounters a man, and he was wandering in the field. And the man asks him, what is it that you are looking for? Yosef responds, I'm searching for my brothers. Please tell me, where are they shepherding? So the man says, they left from here. I heard them say that they're going to go to Dotan. And so Yosef goes after his brothers and he finds them in Dotan. Okay, a very cryptic story. And if we flip just to the last page for a moment, source number 12. Right, the Chamali, which just kind of sets the picture for us of what's going on here. The dialogue is inserted between two worlds. Between the quiet and tranquil world of Joseph at home, shielded and spoiled by his father, and the stormy, troubled ruin of a world that was his after he met his brothers. Commentators, both ancient and modern, have been puzzled by this insertion. What was the point of this short dialogue between Joseph and the anonymous passerby? The Torah does not usually indulge in such realistic interludes for the sake of detail. Consequently, our sages endowed this man with a mysterious character. This man who opens the conversation without waiting to be asked and knows all the answers is not a chance passerby, but an angel, a divine messenger. Okay, so there has to be something more going on here, or else the Torah would not have I don't want to say wasted words, but would not have used extra words to tell us about Yosef's encounter with this stranger, other than that it must be indicating or alluding to us that this is not any person in the street, but this is in fact an angel that is that is helping to transition and move the story along in very significant ways.
It's a long trip, if I may say, that Yosef undertook, that his father told him, go see what your brothers are up to, how they're doing. He leaves the neighborhood of Hebron in the south and goes all the way up to the north. That's a long trek and a dangerous one, potentially, for one person traveling by himself up to Shechem, and then looking around. And he's looking for his brother, and he doesn't just continue wandering the location. He asks, he opens his mouth and admits he doesn't know where his brothers are, and he's looking. And this idea of Anima Vakesh et Achai, that's interesting. He wants to be with them. He wants to have contact with them, but this whole drama of the family is that his brothers are not happy with him. They would prefer not being with him or having him around because, among other things, they think he's an informer.
Right.
I don't know if somebody else, it's Rena here, okay. I don't know if somebody else comments on it, but I was wondering why it doesn't name his brothers and instead says they're the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Why doesn't the Torah just say his brothers Asher, Gad, Naphtali, Yisachar, Zevulun? I mean, it's more words, but that's who they were. And does it reflect badly on Zilpah and Bilhah? We don't know very much about them at all.
Right. So I have seen those who say that the fact that he's mentioned with the Bnei Apilak Shot, right, that the Bilhah and Zilpah were the, I don't know, call them concubines, or they were the lesser wives, that's an indication of Yosef's status in the household, either as just a young kid or that he wasn't at the same, he wasn't at the top tier of whatever the top tier children were doing. But it is an interesting comment.
But the ones who tossed him into that bore there without the water, but with the scorpions, were not Asher, Gad, Naphtali and them, but it was his the primary brothers, the brothers of Leah. I mean, the sons of Leah.
There's a lot to say about which children, act in the story, and which mother they come from. There's a lot there. Okay, so Rashi tells us, right, picking up on one of the curious details in what we just read from the Chumash, Emek Hebron. Has anyone been to Hebron?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Has anyone seen a
long
map of
time
Hebron?
ago.
Where's Hebron?
It's not that far from Jerusalem, right?
South of
Jerusalem, in the Judean hills.
Mm-hmm.
So Rashi asks, what does it mean, may Emek Hebron? From the valley of Hebron. Well, Hebron Bahar. Hebron is on a mountain.
Big rock.
Shene'emar vayalu b'negev vayavo ad Hebron. So, right, we have proof from the Torah itself that Hebron is on we don't need a map, we even internally to the Torah can prove it. Ela me'itza amuka shel oto tzadik hakavor bechevron. So what does it mean, Emek Hebron, the valley of Hebron? From the deep advice of the tzaddik who is buried in Hebron. Who's the tzaddik that's being referred to?
Yosef?
No, this is not buried.
Where is Yosef? Oh, Abraham is buried in Hebron. No?
Avraham Avinu.
Avraham.
Well,
right?
Abraham and Yitzchak then, no?
So right from
Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov?
the Kayim
and Adam.
Will
the
be.
Kayim Ashen Amar La Avraham ben Habitarim Kiger Zaracha. Right? In order to fulfill the prophecy that was made to Abraham, that your descendants will be strangers for 400 years in a land that's not theirs. Okay, so that this encounter is the beginning of the fulfillment of that prophecy made to Abraham. So Rashi says that's what's meant by Emek Hebron. Okay. So as Nachama Leibowitz expounds on this, since Hebron was in the mountain and not the valley, the apparently superfluous insertion Emek is taken figuratively to imply deep in the sense of mysterious. Hebron is taken as a figurative expression of the patriarch Abraham who was buried there. Thus, we have an allusion to the mysterious advice imparted to Abraham regarding the future of his descendants, that they would sojourn in a land not their own. It was this prophecy that Jacob and Joseph were fulfilling unwittingly, the father in sending and the son in going to seek his brothers. Rashi regards the reference to Hebron not merely in the locative geographical sense, but in the deeper one of spiritual causation. The prime mover of all things was ultimately behind the departure of Yosef, in accordance with the pattern, the mysterious advice imparted to Abraham, who can fathom its mystery. Okay, so back to our original introduction with the Rashbam. Do you think this Rashi is a Pshat interpretation?
I just would like to add, if I may, one other thing from the Rashi. The
Okay.
reason he identifies the Ish as Gabriel is based on a pasuk from Daniel,
Mhm.
which says Ha'ish Gabriel. So
Okay.
he hears that resonance.
Right.
He
Right.
didn't
No
he
horn.
didn't come up with it from the Talmud or anything. He came up with it from the book of Daniel.
Okay. Thank you. So is this a Pshat interpretation? Is this one of the interpretations that you think Rashbam was arguing with Rashi about at the dinner table? Or would Rashbam agree with him on this? Beatrice, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm going to say that he would argue with him because there isn't, or I'm missing something, but it looks like there isn't a peg on which to hang that comparison. Like the word amok doesn't appear in the scene with the Brit Ben Habetarim.
Okay.
So how do you get from to that particular incident in Abraham's life?
Okay.
And Abraham at all?
I hear what you're saying. Anyone else?
Well, I think the creative way to answer it is to say, well, how do you explain it then?
Right. So that's the question to you, Beatrice. So what would the Rashbam do with me emek?
Right.
Because it's not an emek, it's a har.
Yeah. So he might say anywhere there's a har, there has to be an emek also. So maybe they were in the valley associated with that har. Maybe he would say that. I don't know. Okay, let's do one more. So when Yosef encounters this man, or this angel, whatever it is, he's told that the brothers left here, Nasumizeh, Kishamati Omrim Neocha Dotaina. And I heard them say that they're going to go to Dotan. So here, what does Rashi say about on this? Source number 7. Nasumizeh, Hisiu Atzman Min Ha'achva. They actively remove themselves or departed from all feelings of brotherhood. Neocha Dotaina will go to Dotan. Levakesh lecha nichlei datot sheyemitutcha bahem. Why do they go to Dotan? Let us seek some legal pretext, to put you to death. Ulefi pshuto shem makomhu. Ve'ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. But according to the Pshat, it's simply a place that they went to. And the text does not depart from its Pshat. So two radically different interpretations here of what's going on. Right? We would typically say that there's the Midrashic interpretation, and the Midrashic interpretation is that they are removing themselves or actively disassociating themselves from any brotherly feeling towards Yosef in order to plot his murder. And the name Dotan somehow alludes to that because it's semantically at least connected to datot, which means laws or pretexts. They're looking for some legal loophole by which they can justifiably harm or even kill Yosef. But then Rashi says, it's also the name of a place. The text can never depart from its simple reading. What does he mean by the text can never depart from its simple meaning here?
That suggests perhaps that Rashi himself recognizes that while it makes for a nice link to the etymology of a word, dat and dotan, sort of familiar and so on, he goes ahead and repeats a basic rule that the Torah doesn't lose its literal sense. I would suggest that the stranger who mysteriously appears before Yosef as he's looking for his brothers is simply a passerby who happened to know his brothers, had heard them talking about where they were going, probably did not hear that they were conspiring to find a way to halachically kill their brother, but rather was somebody who was there. We have a concept, I think, of Vayeshev et haketz, that God has designed the universe so that the ultimate result can happen because there are roles that people play. And this person who happened to be there to hear the brothers and hear what they said is acting in effect as a malach of God, an agent of God, without necessarily knowing that he is such an agent, but he serves in the story. And it's important that the story is there. As for looking for a legal reason to kill their brother, why not just do it in Shechem?
Okay.
They control the area.
Yeah.
There are no witnesses around who are going to say anything. They can do whatever they wish. They are 40, 50 miles from Hebron. They can do it. And yet there's something else going on. It's much more complicated. The Nitziv's comment, Perush on Tanakh, on Chumash, rather, I think is called Ha'amek Davar, which roughly is going deeper into the matter.
Yeah.
And that deeper look can deal with what are motivations, what are real ones, and what are things that just, it happened. Somebody said something and somebody listened. Yosef needed advice. He asked for advice. He gets advice and he follows it. And initially, it seems that's the worst thing he could do. He ends up being captured by his brothers and treated horribly. But it leads to the other events subsequently in the century or two beyond.
Yeah,
That's important,
that's
vitally
quite a beautiful,
important.
Quite a beautiful explanation, Robert, you gave us for an angel, right? And we talk a lot about angels, and I'm sure you have what to say.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that what I appreciate from what Robert just said is the thought that the question, I should say, of who is writing the Torah. To write implies a choice of words. And if one chooses Dotan instead of Shechem, even though they're they're relatively close to one another compared with Hebron, why Dotan? Why not in the vicinity of Shechem? Could have been said that way. Why Dotan? And as soon as one starts to raise that question, it implies that there's a special answer to it, you see.
Right.
So, and it's not that Moshe composed the Torah. He didn't. He wrote down the Torah, but yet in the book of Devarim, it seems more of him was involved in it than in the other books.
Right.
But we've noticed before that there is such a thing. It seems as if there is an all-knowing narrator. Well, there is, So if we believe that it is a gift from Hashem. So to look for another level of meaning while pegging it onto something else seems to be called for by the very genre itself, So that's something I hear.
All right, beautiful. Let's see what the Ramban has to say. Source number 9. We're jumping around a little bit. So he begins by quoting Rashi. Now, right, he quotes Rashi word for word. Ein hakavana l'rabotenu שיפרש לו האיש, נעשו מזה מן האח והלכו לעורר עליך דינין וצרמות, שאם כן, היה נמנע ללכת. When Rashi tells us that the brothers removed themselves or disassociated themselves from any brotherly feeling towards Yosef, and they went to plot against him to kill him, it doesn't mean that this man told Yosef, they're plotting to kill you. Because if that's the case, Yosef would not have gone. Even, right, we might think of Yosef as sort of a naive young boy, but even so, if he knew that that was the brother's intention, he would not have gone, continue to search after them, says the Ramban. He wouldn't put himself in danger. Aval hakavana lahem, ki ha'ish Gavriel asher higid lo, higid emet, ve'amar lashon mishamesh lifshnei panim. But rather, what they mean to say is that this man, Gavriel, whether he's a man or an angel, the Ramban doesn't get into, who told Yosef that they went to Dotan, told him a truth on two levels. He used language that works on two different fronts. Shnehem emet, both are true. Hu lo hivin hanistarbo, v'halach achar hanigla. So it's quite interesting. Yosef did not understand the hidden message alluded to by the reference to Dotan that Rashi made explicit for us, that they were plotting against Yosef to find means to justify killing or harming him. But Yosef only followed the simple understanding, the nigla, the revealed meaning of what this man told him. That's why he goes after his brothers and finds them in Dotan, even though, according to Rashi, he's just been informed that they're plotting to kill him. Amarlo vidrashazu mipnei sha'ish hazer. Okay, and then so we can stop there. Okay, so I think this is a very important Ramban for telling us what Rashi might mean by ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto, that the text can never depart the pshat. It has to make sense. There might be these hidden meanings within the text, but it has to make sense on a pshat level. It has to make sense in the nigla, in a way that a common person would understand and act on it in the context of an everyday encounter. So yes, this might be alluded to by Dotan, what Rashi tells us, that they're seeking means of plotting against Yosef, but it can only work, that only works if we can also give it a more straightforward, sensical meaning within the context of what is being said. And that's why Rashi has to add that Dotan is the name of a place, the Emi Krayotse Midei Pshuto, that it can't depart from the Pshat. It has to make sense. Dotan has to be a real, actual place that we could locate on a map. And if that's the case, then we can also add on the hidden meaning which Rashi provided for us. That everyone good with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. We're not going to debating the Gemara where Rashi's quoting from is an interesting Gemara in of itself. I'll just give a brief overview of what's going on in the Gemara. So that's back in source number 8. We start with the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is talking about Hilchot Shabbos and the laws of Hotzah, about carrying in the public domain on Shabbos. So it says that there's a bit debate in the Mishnah about whether a man, and interesting questions whether this is only a man or whether this would be true for women as well, whether a man is allowed to go out on Shabbos adorned in various weapons, sword, shields, bow and arrow, etc. What's the debate? What's the debate here? The debate is, are they muksa? Is there any permitted use for these things on Shabbos? So obviously, if there's an actual war situation, then pikuach nefesh would override any rules of Shabbos. But on a regular Shabbos, can you go out with a sword and a shield? And so there's one opinion in the Mishnah that says, yes, a man can go out adorned in these weapons because they're takshitim, they're ornamental. that there's some aesthetic value to wearing them, even if not using them. And the Gemara gets into a huge, fascinating debate over whether this is really true and how would we know if weapons are ornamental and have decorative value.
So women,
Value. Well, one
There.
would be if women wear them, right, Arthur? But there's
oh, no, I didn't say that. I said the women would admire the men wearing these.
Okay. Right. So one approach the Gemara uses is, well, will there be weapons in the times of Mashiach? And so there's a big debate over that. And if there's no need for weapons ever, then they say, well, maybe it's like a candle in the morning. Candle in the morning doesn't even serve any ornamental purpose. The rabbis of the Gemara weren't at Pottery Barn and any of these other stores that sell a million candles. But there has to be some function, some functionality, or some potential functionality. And if there will be no wars in the time of Mashiach, that might be a proof that there's no functionality and therefore no purpose, no value in wearing weapons as ornamental. And then it quotes another pasuk about wearing weapons, and it says, "Oh no, you can't talk about that pasuk because that pasuk is referring to words of Torah. It's not referring to weapons, even though it uses weapon." Put your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, your splendor and your glory. And so the Gemara says, no, that pasuk, even though it uses the term cherev, sword, it's referring to Torah. Amar le Rav Kahana lemar berei de Rav Huna, hai b'divrei Torah geti. This pasuk is written about words of Torah. Amar le ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Maybe it's true that we have a tradition that this pasuk is referring to words of Torah, but ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto, a text cannot depart from its simple meaning, so therefore it must also be referring to weapons. And therefore, end of the day, the Gemara concludes that you can go out, at least the man can go out adorned in weapons, because there is some objective ornamental value to it in all times and all places. Interesting Gemara. Okay, so and it adds a little bit to what might be meant by this phrase, in mikra yotzei midei pshuto. Okay, we're quickly coming to the end of our time. So let's go to number 10. Source number 10 kind of concludes this one section on the brothers going to Dotan and their plot against Yosef. And the angel that Yosef encounters, this comes from the Telner Rav of Yitzchak Twersky. I recently acquired his book of his Divrei Torah, so you'll be hearing a lot of it in this coming year as I'm making my way through it. Rav Twersky was a Rebbe in Boston, was a professor at Harvard. You might have seen some of his works on Maimonides. So anyway, he writes quite beautifully, right, that talking about this angel that Yosef encounters, or this man who might be an angel, or man who functions as an angel. The challenge to each individual is to perceive the message of the agents of the Ribono Shel Olam in his life. This is the connection between Parshas Vayeshev and Chanukah in the theme of Mace, the need for sensitivity to perceive the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our lives. Robert, I think very much along the lines of what you were saying about the angel, is that we get messengers and we get people that carry and guide us in different ways, but we have to open ourselves up to hear them. So it's interesting when you have an interpretation like this, which I think hopefully speaks to us in a spiritual way, right? Our question about, well, is that a Pshat interpretation? Right? Can we tie that into Rashi? Can we tie that back to the Torah and say that this is Pshat, or is this way beyond Pshat? It's an open-ended question. I'm not sure that there's a right or wrong answer to it, but it's that's kind of what we're toying with today. And we'll conclude with Rabbi Chaim Angel, Rhonda's brother, whom we've all benefited from learning from him. This is a collection of his essays published under the title Through an Opaque Lens. It was an essay originally written in a book celebrating the life and teaching of Nechama Leibowitz. Okay, so in it, he kind of sets up for us this endeavor of studying Pshat and how study of the Mefarshim, of the classical commentators, relates to our study of Pshat. In line with the traditional exegesis, Nechama Leibowitz emphasized that we must scrutinize the meaning and significance of each word and passage in the Torah and perceive its messages as communicated directly to us. We accomplish these daunting tasks by consulting the teaching of Chazal and our Mefarshim. In effect, they serve as our eyes through which we understand the biblical text in its multifaceted and ever applicable glory. Of course, their opinions must be painstakingly evaluated against the biblical text. Sometimes one position is preferable to another because it captures the language or spirit of a passage more fully. On many occasions, the text simultaneously sustains multiple interpretations on different levels, but it is always the text that demands our attention. To those studying Parshanut as a discipline, whether for methodological approaches or its historical context, Chazal and Mefarshim are no longer mere ancilla on the biblical text. Stated differently, the student of Tanakh views Mefarshim as secondary literature, while the student of Parshanut or history treats Mefarshim as primary sources. These contrasting perspectives almost necessarily will yield markedly different understandings of the comments of the Mefarshim. Okay, so the question of what is the primary text, right? Going back to the Rashbam. Are we studying Chumash in order to appreciate and connect to the halachic application and halachic exegesis and applying the halachic rules as set out in the Gemara and Midrashim? Or are we studying Chumash for Chumash's sake? And if we're studying Chumash for Chumash's sake, so then all those Midrashim and all those exegetical readings of it might take on very different meanings and have different significance based on what our starting point or primary focus is. So it's quite interesting, I think, that it's Parshat Vayeshev. I mean, again, this is universal questions that really can be applied to each and every word, each and every pasuk, each parak, each parsha in the Chumash and in Tanakh. But it really comes front and center in our parsha, Parshat Vayeshev, based partially on that historical and not interesting facts of the Rashbam and how his commentary was published in many of the Mikra Gedolot for many years and centuries, and in some of the nature of the stories that we're reading that are able to exist on so many different levels. So for me, this is a really interesting, fascinating meta topic, and applying it to our parsha, I think, yields some really interesting, hopefully thought-provoking ideas for all of us to further muster. Any final questions or thoughts on any of this? Yep, we see your arm again, Ann.
I just wanted to say that my favorite word tonight is mitchadash. That because it's the hitpael, which is a reflexive. In other words, the text itself is always making something new.
Yeah.
It's as if we are maybe sometimes forget that it is the wisdom of Hashem that is there. And so it's always new. And the Ramban says it's always new because we're always different.
Yeah.
And, let's just admit that and go ahead with what really fascinates us. But the point of doing all of this is that we try to create a community with one another. I mean, why else would we, go through all of this? It's because we do want to kind of travel together and go ahead. And unfortunately, that was not something that happened for Yosef. He saw the suffering of the sons of Bilhah and the maidservants or whatever the category is, and so he really identified with them. There was out of his own compassion. He wasn't a child of Leah, and so the children of Leah are in a different category, and
right.
so there's there's no question that of that. I mean, why else would that be mentioned? I mean, it's so intriguing because it makes sense of so much that follows, but why this, why not that? Well, it's so that we can come together in our trying to understand it, that's
All
what
right,
it's.
beautiful, beautiful. Great way to end it. Have a good night, everybody. So there is a Minion Thursday morning. I will hopefully be there, but then we are off to spend Thanksgiving with family in New York, and we won't be in Shul on Shabbos, but we'll see everyone hopefully next Tuesday, and we'll maybe bring some Hanukkah Torah in as well next week.
Wonderful.
Thank
Have
you,
a safe
Rabbi.
journey.
Thank you.
you.
Yahtzee Tov.
Safe journey. Have a
Bye.
good